A wealthy man made a homeless woman pregnant. Everyone laughed at him, mocking his foolishness. But 5 years later, they all came to regret it. Alex Reed, a man whose gaze always seemed cold and distant, was steering his luxury car through the busy streets of the city. His life was a continuous loop of high-powered meetings, business breakfasts, and multi-million-dollar deals. He had everything anyone could ever want: lavish mansions, sports cars, trips to exotic locations. But despite his name being synonymous with success, there was an emptiness inside him that all the wealth in the world couldn't fill. On this night, like so many others before, he found himself alone behind the wheel. His mind was cluttered with thoughts that chased him relentlessly. The silence inside his luxury car, a stark contrast to the lively chaos outside. He stared blankly out the window until something caught his eye. At a busy intersection beneath a grimy, dimly lit awning, a young woman huddled under a worn-out blanket, trying to shield herself from the cold. Her disheveled hair fell over her shoulders, but it wasn't her appearance that captivated him. It was her eyes. They were empty, yet filled with a quiet strength he couldn't quite understand. Alex's car idled at the red light, and he found himself staring at her for a few seconds. Who was she? How could someone so young find themselves in such a situation? The light turned green, and the impatient honk from the car behind him jolted him back to reality. He accelerated, but the image of the woman lingered in his mind. Over the next few days, her face haunted his thoughts. She had become a shadow in his mind, a constant reminder of what was missing in his life. Purpose. Without fully understanding why, Alex decided to drive through the same route again a few days later. There she was, in the same spot, in the same position, as if time had stopped for her. This time, he didn't just glance. He parked a few yards away and walked towards her. The woman noticed his approach, but didn't react. She remained curled up, watching him cautiously, saying nothing. "Have you eaten?" Alex asked bluntly, unsure of what else to say. She met his gaze with narrowed eyes, the look of someone who had seen too much but still clung to a sliver of hope. "I don't need charity," she replied, her voice raspy, likely from lack of use. Alex crouched down to her level. "It's not charity, it's just food." She hesitated, but her stomach growled loud enough for both of them to hear. Without another word, he handed her a paper bag filled with bread and fruit he had picked up from a nearby bakery. She took the bag without a word of thanks, but Alex noticed the faint tremor in her hands. As she opened the bag and began to eat, he realized just how hungry she was. Still, she ate slowly, as if trying to savor the moment, her eyes never leaving him, filled with suspicion. "My name is Alex," he said, trying to break the silence. She looked at him for a moment, as if debating whether to respond. "Emily," she finally said curtly, before returning to her food. "How long have you been out here?" Alex asked. Emily didn't answer immediately. She finished the piece of bread in her hand, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and then spoke. "Too long." Alex glanced around, noticing how people rushed by, indifferent to Emily, as if she was just part of the city's background. "Nowhere to go?" he pressed. "No," Emily replied, her tone final. There were no further details to be shared. For her, this conversation had already gone on too long. Alex realized he wouldn't get any more answers from her that night. Alex stood up, adjusted his jacket, and took a step back. "I'll come back tomorrow if I need anything else," he said, looking directly at her. But Emily averted her gaze, as if she had already checked out of their brief interaction. As Alex walked away, a sense of unease settled over him, like he was leaving something important behind. Even after returning to the comfort of his home, images of Emily lingered in his mind. The next day, Alex followed his usual routine. Meetings with prominent business people, discussions about new investments, and elegant lunches with people he barely knew. But everything felt distant, like he was moving through the motions on autopilot, emotionally detached. In the midst of it all, Emily's image refused to fade. No matter how hard he tried to focus on work, there was something about her that had a hold on him. "You seem more distracted than usual today," remarked his business partner Ryan, over a business lunch. "Just got a lot on my mind," Alex replied, not wanting to delve into details. "It's someone, isn't it?" Ryan teased with a chuckle. "Don't tell me someone finally cracked Alex Reed's stone-cold heart." Alex gave a faint smile, trying to brush off the comment, But the truth was, he wasn't even sure what he felt. That evening, Alex made the decision to return to the place where he'd first met Emily. He was curious, but there was something else driving him. When he arrived, there she was again, sitting under the awning in the same spot, with the same weary expression. This time, he brought more than just food. He had clothes, some utensils, and even a little cash. As he approached, he noticed that Emily recognized him immediately, but her face showed only the slightest hint of surprise. Alex held out the clothes and the utensils. "For you," he said, hoping for a different reaction than the night before. Emily stared at the items for a moment and without a word took what he offered. There was no thank you, but Alex hadn't expected one. He understood that for someone in her situation, trust was a rare commodity. "You shouldn't do this," Emily muttered, her eyes still on the clothes she'd just received. "Do what?" Alex asked, puzzled. "Think you can change someone's life with a little charity," Emily replied, looking at him with a mix of resentment and sadness. Alex didn't respond right away. He knew she was right, but something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. He wasn't there, just out of kindness. There was something else, something he couldn't quite put into words. In the days that followed, Alex found himself drawn back to that corner, always trying to learn more about Emily. She remained reluctant to accept anything from him, but he couldn't ignore the exhaustion in her eyes every time they met. Still, Emily was a woman of few words, always keeping a barrier between them, as if refusing to let him into any part of her story. "You always come back," Emily said one evening, her tone a mix of curiosity and frustration. "Maybe because I think you deserve more than this," Alex replied, gesturing to the streets around them. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Everyone thinks they know what's best for someone else. You think you have the answers to my life?" Alex looked at her thoughtfully. "No, I don't think I have the answers, but I think I can try to help." Emily turned away, flicking the blanket aside with disdain. "People like you don't understand," she muttered. "You show up, offer a few things, then head back to your perfect life. But I stay here, nothing changes." Her words hit Alex hard. He knew there was truth in what she said, but it didn't shake him. Something about her challenged him to keep coming back. He didn't just want to offer a fleeting handout. Alex wanted to understand Emily, and that desire made him restless. One overcast afternoon, as Emily watched people passing by, an older woman hurried past, casting a disapproving glance. "These people on the street," she muttered under her breath, adjusting her designer purse, unaware that Alex was nearby. Feeling a surge of frustration, Alex stepped closer to the woman. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice firm. Startled, the woman stammered, stepping back. I didn't mean to offend, but you get it, right? These people live off handouts. How can anyone respect that?" Emily shifted uncomfortably, not surprised. She'd grown used to comments like these. Alex, however, felt anger rising in his chest. "Respect isn't earned through clothes or status," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "Maybe you should think a little more before you speak." His words cut through the air, silencing the woman, who stared at him in shock before quickly walking away, mumbling something unintelligible. Once she was lost in the crowd, Emily looked at Alex, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and a gratitude she didn't know how to express. "You didn't have to do that," Emily said, breaking the silence. "I know," Alex replied, shaking his head, "but I wanted to." Emily said nothing more, but something shifted in that moment. The wall between them, which had once felt impenetrable, began to crack. In the days that followed, Emily allowed Alex to sit with her more often, and their conversations, initially surface level, slowly became more meaningful. Alex learned that Emily was far more than just someone living on the streets. She was a person who had faced unimaginable hardships, yet somehow still stood, even if deep down she was broken. "How did you end up here?" Alex asked one evening, as they both watched the city lights flicker in the distance. Emily hesitated, staring at the dirty sidewalk beneath her feet. "It's a long story," she said. "I've got time," Alex insisted, his voice gentle but filled with curiosity. She let out a heavy sigh, as if she were exhausted from carrying the weight of her own story. "I had a normal life, you know. College, a promising future, like they say. But one thing led to another, and I lost everything." Alex looked at her, eager to know more, but sensing that Emily wasn't ready to fully open up just yet. "Do you think you could rebuild your life?" he asked, watching her closely. She met his gaze with empty eyes. "I think I've passed the point of rebuilding anything." Alex refused to accept that. To him, there was something more to Emily, a hidden strength she couldn't see in herself. He didn't know exactly what drove him, but he was determined to show her that life still had something to offer. "And what if you're wrong?" he said with a soft smile. "What if I could help you prove that?" Emily shook her head, laughing bitterly. "You and your hero ideas, Alex. Things aren't that simple." But even though Emily wouldn't admit it, Alex's persistent presence was beginning to bring subtle changes to her life. It wasn't just the food or the clothes he brought her. It was the simple fact that day after day someone was showing up, caring about her, while the rest of the world moved on, indifferent. Alex couldn't quite understand how, but the connection between them was growing. He had never met anyone like Emily, and for the first time in a long while, he felt his life shifting in ways he hadn't expected. He glanced over at her, watching as she absent-mindedly gazed at the streetlights outside. "You still haven't told me your full story," he murmured, his voice soft, almost a whisper. She looked back at him, her eyes filled with sorrow, though somehow lighter than before. "Maybe someday I will." That night, sleep escaped Alex. The brief exchange with Emily echoed in his mind. He sensed there was something more behind her words, something dark and heavy that held her back from moving forward. But no matter how much he tried, he couldn't imagine what could have happened to leave her stranded on the streets. His curiosity grew stronger each day, as did his desire to help her. Alex was convinced that Emily deserved more than this harsh life she was living, and he was determined to be the one to help her change. The next afternoon, he walked the same familiar path, eager to see her again. But when he arrived at the spot where Emily usually stayed, something was wrong. The worn blanket she always had was missing. Emily was gone. He scanned the area, searching for any sign of her, but there was nothing. Panic started to creep in. "Excuse me," Alex said, stopping a man who was hurrying past. "Have you seen a woman who used to be here, wrapped in a blanket?" The man barely slowed down, muttering without even looking at Alex. "There's always someone new around here, buddy." "No idea who you're talking about." Alex sighed, frustration bubbling inside him. He spent the next few hours wandering the nearby streets, asking anyone who might have noticed her, but no one seemed to care enough to remember. The way Emily seemed invisible to the world around her was suffocating. She could vanish and no one would even notice. "Have you seen her?" Alex asked a street vendor who gave him a curious glance. "Haven't seen her for a few days," the vendor replied. "I think she's gone. But that's how it goes with people living on the street, right? One day they're here, the next. Who knows?" The vendor shrugged while rearranging his goods. Alex didn't respond, just kept walking, feeling the gnawing fear that Emily might be lost to him forever. He had to find her, had to know if she was all right. He continued to roam the streets, stopping at shelters, asking other homeless people, but no one had any useful information. Just as he was about to give up, he spotted a crowd gathered in the park. An ambulance was parked nearby, and dread filled his chest as he rushed over, fearing the worst. When he got close, his heart sank. There was Emily, sitting on the ground, pale and trembling with fever. Paramedics surrounded her, and she looked terrifyingly fragile. "What happened?" Alex asked breathlessly as he reached the paramedics. "Severe dehydration, possibly a serious infection," one of them answered as they carefully lifted Emily onto a stretcher. "She needs immediate medical attention." Without hesitation, Alex pulled out his phone and called the nearest hospital, ensuring Emily would be taken to a place where she could receive the best care possible. The paramedics exchanged glances, clearly surprised. They were used to seeing bystanders watch from a distance, too indifferent or too afraid to intervene. But Alex wasn't like that. Inside the ambulance, Alex held Emily's cold hand tightly by his side. Even in her weakened state, Emily struggled to speak, her breath coming in short, labored gasps. Alex wasn't quite sure how to respond. The truth was, he didn't fully understand his own motives. Maybe it was a sense of justice or guilt for living such a privileged life. Perhaps it went deeper, to a place within himself he hadn't yet discovered. Why did I care so much? He wondered. The following morning, as Alex sat in the hospital waiting room, Anxiously awaiting any updates, the doctor approached him. "She's out of danger," the doctor said while glancing through the charts, "but we need to keep her under observation for a few days." Alex let out a sigh of relief. "I'll stay here as long as it takes," he responded, resolute. When Emily woke up, still frail, she saw Alex beside her. She looked confused and vulnerable, an expression he had never seen on her before. For a moment she said nothing, just gazing at him as if trying to figure out why he was still there. Then, something shifted in her face. The guardedness she always wore seemed to soften. "I never asked for your help, Alex," Emily whispered, her voice still shaky but firm. "I know," Alex replied, locking eyes with her. "But that doesn't mean I didn't want to help you." Emily turned her gaze away, as if his honesty was too much to handle. In the days that followed, Alex kept visiting her in the hospital. Slowly but surely, Emily's resistance began to fade. She still kept a certain emotional distance, but it was clear something was changing. One afternoon, as he sat by her bed, Emily looked at him with an expression that blended both fear and relief. "There's something you need to know," Emily began, hesitating. "I'm pregnant." The words echoed through the room like a bomb. Alex froze, momentarily speechless. "Pregnant? How could this have happened?" He stared at Emily, who now avoided his eyes, clearly embarrassed. "Did you know?" he finally asked, finding his voice. Emily nodded slowly. "I found out just before I got sick. I didn't want you to know. I don't want to be another burden on you." Alex leaned in closer, gripping Emily's hands tightly. "It's not a burden. It needs to be. It never was. This changes things, yes, but it doesn't change how I feel about you." Emily looked at him in surprise, perhaps expecting a different reaction. She had been used to people turning their backs on her, but Alex wasn't like the others, and she couldn't quite understand why he kept staying by her side. "You don't get it, Alex. My life is a mess, and this baby—" Her voice trembled as if the weight of everything was simply too much to bear. Alex interrupted her gently. "This baby will have a chance, and so will you. We'll figure it out together." Emily closed her eyes, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. A part of her still fought against the idea of trusting Alex completely, but another part, perhaps the deepest part of her, wanted to believe that he truly meant what he said. While Alex stood there beside Emily, he realized he was stepping onto a path with no return. Nothing would ever be the same again. But somehow, he was prepared for it. What started as an attempt to help a stranger had now evolved into something far deeper and beyond his control. Word of Emily's pregnancy spread quickly among those closest to Alex, and it wasn't long before the news became the source of jokes. In the elite circles where he had always been admired and envied, the surprise quickly morphed into ridicule and gossip. After all, how could the relentless businessman Alex Reed, who was used to moving among the wealthiest and most powerful, get involved with a homeless woman and now be expecting a child with her? That weekend, Alex had been invited to a critical business dinner, the kind of event he'd never think of declining. But this time, his presence there felt different. All eyes were on him, and whispers were inevitable. Among glasses of wine and lavish dishes, rumors about his personal life rippled through every table. Ryan, his business partner, didn't miss the chance to take a jab at him. "So Alex, I hear you've decided to trade in the models and actresses for how can I say it, a exotic figure." Ryan smirked maliciously, drawing stifled laughter from the other businessmen around them. Alex stared at him, his gaze steady, his face void of a smile. "This isn't your concern, Ryan, and I suggest you keep the focus on business." "Relax, man, we're just curious," Ryan chuckled. "No one saw this coming from you. Always so calculated." He raised his glass, taking a long sip of his wine. Alex felt a growing discomfort and pushed back from the table, knowing this kind of reaction was inevitable, though he hadn't anticipated just how unsettling it would be to face his old friend's mockery. Slipping out quietly, he stepped onto the balcony, where the night air seemed far less suffocating than the curious stares inside. He had barely had time to process everything happening with Emily and the baby, and now he had to face the judgment of others. As he gazed at the distant city lights, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Ryan, still with a smirk of condescension on his lips. "Man, have you lost your mind?" Ryan asked, stopping beside him. A homeless woman, Alex. Do you even realize what this is doing to your reputation? Your name is all over the headlines, and it's not in a good way, Alex sighed, his eyes fixed on the city below. This isn't about reputation, Ryan. I did what I thought was right. Right? You're risking years of hard work. People won't look at you the same way. You're Alex Reed. Do you even understand what that means? Ryan's irritation was clear as he pressed on. This could be risky for business. Have you even considered that? Alex turned to him, his gaze firm and cold. If business means being a heartless monster who cares about no one, then maybe it's time to rethink everything. You don't understand, Ryan, and I don't expect you to. Ryan let out a disbelieving laugh. The knight in shining armor on his redemption quest. Good luck with that. I just hope you have a plan for when everything falls apart. Unfazed, Alex returned to the room where more people waited for him, their eyes filled with the same malicious curiosity. He didn't expect them to understand. This was a battle he would have to fight alone. And though he knew it well, he couldn't escape the heavy weight of isolation. Once respected and feared by his peers, he had now become the target of their jokes. The next morning, headlines were already everywhere. Photos of Alex and Emily flooded tabloids and gossip websites with titles like "The Millionaire Who Lost His Mind" and "Who is the Woman Who Changed Alex Reed's Life?" Cruel comments and endless speculation filled social media. Some claimed Emily was only after Alex's fortune, while others confidently predicted he would lose everything within months. Alex read a few of the articles, but refused to let them get under his skin. His mind was made up. Later that week, during an important meeting, the situation reached a breaking point. The company's board of directors, a group of impeccably dressed men and women seated around a long marble table, confronted him openly. "Alex, we're concerned about the recent news regarding your personal life." One of the directors began glancing over his glasses. "This could harm the company's image. Our investors are starting to question your decisions, and we need a clear stance on this." Alex leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "My personal life has nothing to do with business. What I do outside of this office doesn't affect my abilities as a businessman." Another director chimed in, trying to strike a more diplomatic tone. "We understand, Alex, but the public doesn't make that distinction. They see you and the company as one and the same. We need to ensure there are no risks." Alex sighed, shaking his head in frustration. "So what you're saying is that my private life is now a liability to the company. Since when did being human become a business risk?" The first director responded without flinching. "This isn't about being human, Alex. It's about control. And right now, it looks like you're losing yours." Alex glanced around the table, taking in the serious faces of people he had worked with for years. These were individuals who had once admired him, followed his lead, without question. Now they saw him as a risk, a threat to what they had all built. He stood up with the same authority that had always commanded attention, and spoke firmly. "I'm doing what I believe is right. If that's a problem for the company, then I'm prepared to deal with the consequences. But let me be clear. My personal life will not be dictated by any board or investors." Without waiting for a response, Alex walked out of the room. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, but his thoughts were far from there. He knew this was just the beginning of a battle, and the price for his choices would be steep. But for Emily, and now for their baby, he was ready to face it all. When he arrived at the hospital where Emily was still recovering, Alex entered her room and found her sitting up in bed, gazing out the window. She looked physically better, but the emotional toll was still visible in her expression. "How are you feeling?" he asked, approaching her. Emily didn't turn to face him, her voice soft and tired. "Better, I think. And you? How are things out there?" Alex let out a deep sigh and sat down next to her. "It's not easy, but I knew it wouldn't be." Emily finally looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness. "I knew it wouldn't be either. I know you're talking about yourself because of me. If you want to walk away, I'd understand." Alex held her hand tightly. "That will never happen. No matter what people say, I'm here. I'll always be here." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of his words. She didn't want to be a burden, but the fear lingered. The fear that at any point Alex might grow tired of carrying the weight of their situation. Yet for the first time in a long while, she felt she wasn't alone. While the world around them crumbled with gossip, judgment, and criticism, Alex and Emily were building something stronger. Something that, despite all the challenges, was becoming more and more unbreakable. 5 months had passed since Alex made the decision to face the world for Emily. With each new hurdle, every harsh word, his conviction only grew. He knew he was on the right path, but the pressure never let up. His reputation, built over years of tough business deals, was now on the line. Still, none of that made him waver. Emily, now living with him in his mansion far from the public eye, was trying to adjust to a life she never thought she'd have. But the tension mounted as the doctors began to notice complications. That day, Emily started feeling intense contractions earlier than expected. Alex, deep in the middle of a tense virtual meeting in his office, received a call from a nurse informing him that Emily had been rushed to the hospital in an emergency. Without hesitation, he ended the meeting, grabbed his keys, and sped to the hospital. When he arrived, he found Emily in the delivery room, surrounded by nurses and doctors working urgently. The room was thick with tension, and he could see the concern etched on the chief doctor's face. "Alex," Emily called out, her voice shaky with pain, reaching out for him. Without thinking, he rushed to her side, gripping her hand tightly. "I'm here. I'm with you," he whispered, trying to mask his own rising fear. His eyes darted across her face, desperate to gauge how serious things really were. The doctor cut in, his voice steady but serious. "The delivery is more complicated than we expected. We're doing everything we can, but the baby's coming early, and that's risky for both him and Emily." For a moment, Alex felt his world stop. He looked at Emily, struggling to breathe through the contractions, and then back at the doctor. "Do whatever it takes. Save them both, please." The next few hours stretched on like a never-ending nightmare. Alex stayed at Emily's side, watching as she fought for her own life and that of their child. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of tension, the weak cry of a newborn echoed through the room. Their baby was born. Relief washed over Alex for a brief second, but it was quickly replaced by worry when he saw how small and fragile Ethan, their son, appeared. "The baby will need intensive care," the doctor said, as the nurses swiftly carried Ethan to the NICU. Alex watched as Emily, utterly exhausted, closed her eyes. He held her hand with unwavering strength, refusing to let go. "He's gonna be okay, Emily. Our son is going to be okay." She opened her eyes slowly, a tired smile barely forming on her lips. "Ethan, I want to name him Ethan." "Ethan," Alex repeated, the name settling in his heart as if it had always belonged there. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, grateful that both of them had made it through. But he knew their fight was far from over. In the days that followed, Ethan remained in the NICU, surrounded by machines monitoring every heartbeat, every breath. Alex visited him every day, splitting his time between Emily, still recovering in her hospital room, and the fragile life fighting to survive inside that incubator. But the headlines were relentless. The press shadowed their every move, hungry for any sign of weakness or failure. Rumors about the baby spread like wildfire, cruel and heartless, with the beggar Alex had seen in tabloids and gossip sites. One afternoon, while Alex watched Ethan through the glass window of the NICU, Ryan showed up at the hospital. He didn't look surprised by what he saw, but his visit wasn't just a friendly gesture. "You know this is still on the table, right?" Ryan crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on the baby. "What's still on the table?" Alex asked, not taking his eyes off Ethan. "People are expecting you to quit. They think this is just a phase, that you'll come to your senses and realize you're throwing your life away." Ryan said, his tone full of judgment. Alex took a deep breath, his patience wearing thin with all the insinuations. "And you? Are you here to convince me to quit too?" Ryan hesitated, speechless for a moment. "I'm here because we've been friends for a long time, but honestly, I can't understand what's keeping you in this situation." Alex finally looked at him, his expression serious, his eyes filled with unwavering determination. "What's keeping me? My responsibility? My son? And if you can't understand that, then we don't have anything left to talk about." Ryan shook his head, a cynical smile playing on his lips. "I hope you know what you're doing, Alex. Because honestly, it looks like you're fighting a losing battle, and everyone's just waiting for the ship to sink." Alex didn't respond. He simply turned back to Ethan, who was still breathing with the help of machines. The odds were against him, but giving up was never an option. Not now, not with so much at stake. Weeks passed, and Emily was finally discharged from the hospital. Ethan, however, still needed intensive care. Alex took Emily home, caring for her with the same attention and tenderness he gave to their son. Their life was far from perfect, but at that moment, they were a family. Small and fragile, but a family nonetheless. One night, as they sat in the living room, Emily looked at Alex, her expression serious. "Have you ever regretted it? Any of it?" Alex met her gaze, reflecting on everything they had faced together. "Never. I'd do it all over again for you and for Ethan." Emily looked away, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. I never thought someone like you would care about someone like me. I don't know if I can ever repay you for what you've done." Alex took her hand, holding it tightly. "This isn't about paying anything back. We're in this together, and together, we'll make it work." At that moment, something shifted within Emily. For the first time, she began to believe that the future Alex had promised could actually become a reality. Despite the entire world seemingly standing against them, Emily felt that, with Alex by her side, she could face whatever came their way. And little Ethan, still small and fragile, would be the reason they'd fight together. What had once seemed like an endless string of tragedies to Emily now held the glimmer of a new hope. But as the world around them continued to doubt, Alex knew the real test was still ahead. The future was uncertain, yet he felt more prepared than ever to face it, with Emily and Ethan by his side. 5 years had passed since Ethan was born, and the lives of Alex and Emily had slowly found a sense of balance. They now lived in a secluded mansion, far away from the prying eyes of the media and the relentless gossip. The world outside seemed to have grown tired of the story of the wealthy millionaire and the woman who had come from nothing. Over time, people began to forget. But within that house, something extraordinary was unfolding. And few could have predicted the turn their lives would take. Ethan, who had been born frail and premature, had grown into a lively, healthy, and endlessly curious child. His intelligence became apparent at an early age. Before he turned 3, he already showed a remarkable fascination with numbers. The boy would spend hours playing with building blocks, arranging them in patterns that only made sense to him. Alex and Emily noticed but didn't think much of it at first. It was natural for parents to see their children as special. One afternoon, while Emily was preparing dinner in the kitchen, Alex was in the living room with Ethan. The boy was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by sheets of paper and colored pencils. Alex watched absent-mindedly until Ethan suddenly called out to him, "Dad, look." Alex walked over, smiling, expecting to see another childish drawing, but instead what he found left him speechless. Ethan had drawn a series of numbers alongside sums and multiplication problems. "Where did you learn this, Ethan?" Alex asked, intrigued. "In my head," Ethan replied innocently. "I like playing with numbers. They're fun." Alex felt a chill run down his spine, sensing that something was out of the ordinary. This wasn't just a child's game. He began paying closer attention to Ethan's activities, and the more he watched, the more astonished he became. Ethan was solving complex math problems without any formal teaching. The next day, Alex spoke to Emily. "Have you noticed how different Ethan is?" "Really noticed?" he asked. Emily, busy with some household tasks, chuckled lightly. "Different? He's an amazing kid, Alex. But all mums think their kids are special." Alex leaned in closer, his eyes serious. "No, Emily, he's not just amazing. Ethan is solving math problems that even I can't understand, and he's only 5. Emily stopped what she was doing, processing what Alex had just said. "But how? He's never been taught." Alex shook his head. "I don't know, but we need to figure out what's going on." In the following weeks, Alex consulted with specialists, educators, and even child psychologists. They confirmed what he had already suspected. Ethan was a prodigy. With an IQ far above the average, he possessed a rare and powerful mathematical mind. The news began to spread, first among Alex's close acquaintances, then across social media, and it didn't take long before TV shows were reaching out for interviews. One of the first people to learn about Ethan's extraordinary talent was Ryan, someone who hadn't seen Alex in a while. During a dinner with other businessmen, Ryan brought up the topic, lacing his words with his usual brand of sarcasm. "So, it seems the son of the millionaire and the beggar is a little genius," Ryan quipped, laughing while the others around the table chuckled, though more restrained in their amusement. Who would have thought something like this could come from that story? Alex, arriving late to the dinner, overheard the comment as he approached the group. "Yes, Ethan is a genius, and I couldn't be prouder of him." His tone was steady, leaving no room for further jokes about his family. Ryan, sensing the tension, quickly changed the subject, but the discomfort in the room was unmistakable. As Ethan's brilliance gained recognition, prestigious schools began sending offers hoping to enroll him. Invitations for him to participate in international competitions flooded in, while early childhood experts insisted he had the potential to be one of the great minds of his generation. For Alex, it all felt surreal, but he was resolute in ensuring Ethan would receive the best education possible. Yet, along with the accolades came the resurfacing of old critics. People who had once mocked Alex's relationship with Emily now tried to edge closer, seeking to reconnect. One day, as Alex and Emily were taking Ethan to a conference on child prodigies, they were approached by a group of Alex's former acquaintances. "Alex, what a surprise running into you here," exclaimed a man who had once sneered at his relationship with Emily. "And this must be the little genius. Congratulations, he really has a bright future ahead." Alex looked at the man for a moment, sensing the insincerity behind his words. "Thanks," he responded curtly, "but we don't need your approval." Emily stood beside him, silent, but feeling the tension mounting. Despite knowing Alex was shielded by his wealth and influence, she still bore the emotional scars from the public scrutiny they'd faced. As much as Ethan's talent was rewriting their story, Emily feared that at some point, old wounds would be torn open once again. Later that evening, after the event, Alex sat in the living room, watching Ethan play with his numbers and blocks while Emily prepared dinner. He felt a mix of pride and unease. The growing attention around Ethan's abilities brought with it an overwhelming pressure. Above all, he knew Emily's past was a burden she still carried, and he worried it might one day affect their son's future. As Ethan played on the floor, mumbling numbers to himself, Emily walked into the room and sat beside Alex. "Do you think we made the right choice?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. Alex looked at her and took her hand. "I have no doubt. Ethan is destined for greatness, Emily, and we'll help him get there." Emily smiled, though the worry lingered in her eyes. The world around them seemed to be changing at last, but she knew that somewhere in the shadows, the old critics still lurked, waiting for another chance to strike. As Ethan's rise to international recognition shone brighter, it also meant they needed to be more united than ever. The growing acknowledgement of Ethan as a prodigy brought a wave of intense attention to the family, leaving them navigating both pride and pressure in equal measure. The cameras, the interviews, the headlines praising the boy's talent, all while constantly dragging up Emily's past, became an unbearable weight for her. Even though Alex was always by her side, Emily couldn't shake the burden she carried. Once homeless, now living in a sprawling mansion with one of the wealthiest men in the country, she still felt vulnerable and out of place. Every time people marveled at Ethan's meteoric rise, it only seemed to ignite more curiosity about her past. The more persistent journalists relentlessly dug into Emily's life, hoping to uncover some scandal to exploit. The fear that everything they had built could come crashing down if her past was portrayed in the wrong light gnawed at her constantly. A special event was fast approaching. Ethan was about to be honored on a live international program for young prodigies. The preparations for the show were a mixture of nervous excitement for the family. Ethan, carefree as any child, was eager to showcase his talents, while Alex and Emily were more concerned about the spotlight it would bring. But it was Emily who suffered the most under the pressure of being once again thrust into the gaze of a public that had already judged her so harshly. In the studio, as the show was about to begin, Emily could hardly breathe. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning the journalists, the flashing cameras, and the whispered conversations happening in the background. She knew what people were thinking, what the gossip headlines always hinted at, and it ate away at her from the inside. Sensing her discomfort, Alex took her hand firmly. "We're in this together, Emily. No matter what they say or what happens, they don't know what we've been through," he reassured her, his eyes locked on hers, trying to offer her the strength she needed. Emily felt some of that strength, but the gnawing feeling that something was about to go wrong wouldn't leave her in peace. In her mind, the memories of those days on the streets and the way society had treated her remained vivid, a scar that had never fully healed. As Ethan took center stage, the host began introducing him as the prodigy taking the world by storm. The first questions were directed at Ethan, who answered with his usual sharp wit and innocent charm. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until the host turned to Emily with a question that sent a chill down her spine. "The audience would love to know a little more about you. Did you always know he was destined to be a genius?" Emily froze for a split second. The question seemed innocent enough, but she knew it was a trap. She could feel the weight of the cameras, the curious eyes of the audience, and the subtle judgment she had always felt. "Ethan has always been special. Even as a baby," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "But we never imagined he'd have this level of talent. He surprises us every day." The host smiled, but there was a glint in his eye that told her he wasn't satisfied. "And what about you, Emily? Your story is just as fascinating. I know life wasn't easy for you before meeting Alex. Could you share a bit about your journey?" Alex, sitting next to her, squeezed her hand even tighter, knowing just how painful that question was for her. He glanced back at the host, realizing he was fishing for a reaction. Emily felt her heart race. She had always known this moment would come, but she still wasn't ready. How could she share her past without being judged once again as the woman who came from nothing? The fear of people gawking at her, seeing her life as a spectacle of shame, made her anxious. She glanced at Ethan, who was playing happily with some blocks on the set, and knew that now, more than ever, she had to face this. "It's true," Emily said, her voice trembling at first. "Before I met Alex, my life was incredibly hard." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I went through things most people couldn't even imagine. I lost my family, my friends, and I ended up on the streets. Those were very dark years." The studio fell silent, and every pair of eyes was locked on her. Emily looked down, the weight of the shame she had carried for so long pressing on her again. But even so, she pressed on. "I used to think there was no way out, that my life would always be like that. I couldn't see a future, couldn't find any hope. People looked right past me like I didn't matter, like I was invisible," Emily said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But one day, Alex came into my life, and he saw me in a way no one else had before." She turned to Alex, her eyes filled with gratitude. "He didn't see me as just a homeless woman. He saw me as a person, and that changed everything." The host, sensing the raw emotion in the air, tried to soften the moment. "Emily, your story is truly inspiring. You went from such a tough place to raising an extraordinary child. It's something we all admire." Emily nodded in acknowledgement, but deep inside, she knew there was more to say. She didn't want her story to be painted simply as a tale of triumph, because she knew the truth was more complicated. But at that moment, she also felt a burden lift, one she had carried for so many years. The shame that had haunted her since her days on the streets was now out in the open. And even though she still feared being judged, something within her had shifted. The program continued with questions about Ethan and his incredible talents, but Emily's mind wandered, lost in her thoughts. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, she felt a profound sense of relief. Alex walked over and hugged her. "You are amazing, Emily," he said, beaming with pride. "There's nothing left to hide now. We're in this together." Though exhausted, Emily smiled, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. "Thank you for never giving up on me." "I never will," Alex replied, kissing her forehead. "Not on you, not on Ethan." As they left the studio with Ethan running ahead, blissfully unaware of what had just unfolded, Emily felt for the first time like she could finally begin to live free from the shadows of her past. She was no longer the woman people overlooked on the streets. Now she was the mother of a genius and the wife of a man who loved her unconditionally, no matter her history. But more than that, Emily had become someone who, after years of struggle and hardship, had finally found peace within herself. Emily's revelation on the show sparked a wave of reactions she hadn't expected. The media, which had once treated her as a mystery to be unraveled, now saw her in a new light. Some outlets tried to spin her story as an uplifting tale of overcoming adversity, while others clung to her past in an attempt to keep the scandal alive. Yet what truly moved Emily was the outpouring of solidarity from everyday people, many of whom saw themselves in her journey of survival and resilience. Alex, as always, remained steadfast by her side, shielded by his usual composure in the face of criticism. But now, rather than defending himself, he felt the scales were finally balancing. Emily, his wife, was no longer the invisible woman the world once mocked. She had faced challenges that most could never endure. Together with Ethan, they were a family that didn't need anyone's approval. Still, the past Emily had unveiled brought new complications. As the days passed after the interview, the people around Alex began to shift their behavior. Once they laughed at him and his choices, but now they viewed him with respect, as someone who had made a decision few would have the courage to make. But public acceptance wasn't what weighed on Emily's mind. What troubled her most was the pressure now being placed on Ethan. Ethan, still a young boy, had become the center of attention, not just for his talent, but for what he represented. He was the child of a woman who had come from the streets, and the weight of expectation on him was immense. On a calm morning, Emily sat in the backyard watching Ethan as he played with his blocks and numbers. Alex came over and sat beside her, sensing the tension in the air. "Is he all right?" Alex asked, his eyes on their son. Emily nodded, but worry was etched across her face. "He seems okay, but I don't know. He's just a child. All this pressure, everything going on around him. I'm scared he'll feel it sooner or later." Alex watched Ethan, who seemed oblivious to the world around him, lost in his mental games. "He's stronger than you think, and we're here to protect him." Alex took Emily's hand. "We won't let any of this destroy him." But Emily knew that some things were beyond their control. Ethan was no longer just their son. He was seen as a prodigy, a genius, carrying the hopes of so many, and that terrified her. She feared that the world, in its hunger for the next big thing, would devour him. A few weeks later, they were invited to a prestigious event where Ethan would receive an international award for young talents. Emily felt anxious. These kinds of events always reminded her of how out of place she felt. Yet Ethan, with his innocence and brilliance, seemed excited at the thought of stepping onto the stage. On the night of the ceremony, Alex dressed in his sharpest suit, while Emily, in a simple dress, tried her best to appear comfortable amidst the elite surrounding them. When Ethan's name, Tanj, was announced, indeed, of the entire room erupted in applause. He walked up to the stage with steady steps and a shy smile. Grasping the trophy, he looked out into the audience, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Everyone awaited a profound word, something that would match the brilliance of the genius he was. But when Ethan took the microphone, he did something unexpected. Instead of speaking about his talent or the award, he looked toward Emily and Alex, where they sat, and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "I am only who I am because of my mom and dad. I'm not just a genius. I'm a kid just like any other, and they love me, not for what I do, but for who I am." The audience fell into a stunned silence, absorbing the impact of his words. Alex and Emily glanced at each other, their eyes filled with emotion. Ethan continued, "Everything I've done up to now was only possible because of their support, and that's what matters most to me." The crowd, once captivated by Ethan's extraordinary talent, now saw him as a child who, despite his brilliance, still needed the warmth and guidance of a family. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the hall, but Emily barely heard it. Her heart was overflowing with pride and relief. Ethan had voiced something she feared he would never have the chance to express, that above all else, he was just a child, not a prize for the world to showcase. After the ceremony, as the lights dimmed and the crowd began to thin out, Emily, Alex, and Ethan slipped out the back of the theater, avoiding the flashing cameras. They were exhausted, but relieved. When they finally reached the car, Ethan, half asleep already, curled his small hand into Emily's. She gently stroked his hand, feeling the calm settle into her soul at last. Alex, driving them home, glanced in the rearview mirror at the two of them and couldn't help but smile. He knew their path ahead would still be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, he felt like they had weathered a storm, and come out stronger on the other side. As the car rolled down the quiet road, Emily gazed toward the horizon, realizing that despite everything, they had found something priceless: the true cost of love. It wasn't easy, it never would be, but in the end, it was the only price worth paying. Alex reached for her hand again, and in that moment, everything felt at peace. There were no more secrets, no more fear. There was only love, the kind that held them together, even when the world around them seemed to be falling apart.